Hello and welcome to training on diversity, equity, and inclusion at Kesem. In this training, we're going to talk about why this work is important and what we're doing around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, here at Kesem. We will cover some of the takeaways and next steps and talk about how you can help us continue our DEI journey. My name is Alicia Kabir and I'm the COO of Kesem. My Kesem name is ML, which stands for Mama Llama, and I enjoy being outdoors with my husband and my 2 boys. We love to travel, camp, hike, and ski. Before we dig in, I do want to note that the slide deck is intended for our volunteers and alumni, and some separate communications around our DEI work will be provided to our Kesem families as well. Let's start with why this work is important. We know that our mission cannot be fully realized without doing this work. This work will help us ensure that every child impacted by a parent's cancer is never alone. We started this work based on feedback that we heard from so many of our constituents, our staff, our student leaders, our families, and we're really grateful for that feedback. We have accomplished so much, and yet there's more work to do. We know that this is a journey and it's going to take time. We know that this work is hard, and we're not going to get it all done this year or even the year after. But it is so important for us to continue this work together. We know that Kesem is not reaching all groups equally. Right now, we know that overall, our camper and student populations do not represent or mirror the communities we serve. We also know that sometimes we accidentally create barriers to accessing our programs, and we are not always inclusive to some of the groups who want to be part of our organization. As we realize this, we now know that we have an opportunity and an obligation to provide equitable access and inclusion to all of our participants. So how do we go forward with this DEI journey? This slide outlines for you the steps that we have taken and some of our future steps as well around our DEI journey. As you can see, the first box is around creating a statement of beliefs and principles, and let me share that with you now. I want to point out some of the text that I underlined here for this training to highlight what I think are the more important parts of this statement. First, as I mentioned before, we know that this is an ongoing and steadfast commitment that is going to take time for us to implement fully. I also want to note that this is not only about camp. This is around how we provide services and support to our constituents year-round, every day. And it's for all of our constituents. It's our camper families, it's our volunteers, it's our board members and supporters. Let's go back to that slide with the approach again. Once we created the statement of beliefs and principles, we started to do data analysis and outreach to identify our barriers to equity and then started to work on solutions. So who helped us along the way? These amazing consultants and partners have been helping us over the past 2 years. As you can see, we started this work in earnest in 2017 when Erin Trent Johnson provided some training for our staff and our student leaders. We then had Lyle and Leslie Hurst complete some analysis on our existing data, and you'll see some of their work in the following slides. And now we also have Desiree Attaway providing training for our staff and also helping develop some DEI training for our volunteers, such as this module. And additionally, Kesem is part of a DEI accelerator, which is a group of individuals and organizations who are all incredibly interested in working together to advance and accelerate our DEI work. I mentioned that we collected a lot of data, and it was really important for us to use this data to inform the action items that we needed to take. We did an online survey where we had over 1,500 responses, and those responses were both from camper families and student leaders. And then we did in-person interviews of camper families and student leaders. We used all of this information to make an action plan and implement next steps. The next few slides are going to show some details around data analysis. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but I wanted to provide a flavor of the information we collected and the different types of questions that we asked. Here, you can see we asked our camper families what steps of the application process might cause people to lose interest in camp. You can see there are a wide range of answers, from completing the application itself to children feeling like they would not fit in at camp. We looked at the data based on demographic and socioeconomic groups to help look at themes and think about how we can keep campers interested in Kesem. We also looked at the ethnicity of our camper families, and the most important part of this slide is the note that we have a large overrepresentation of white campers versus the U.S. population. And so through this data, it became very clear that we need to be more intentional about how we recruit for a more diverse camper family base so that we are representing the communities that we serve. We also looked at income, and what we found is that the lower income folks who apply for camp are more likely to be white, which means that we are not reaching persons of color and the other ethnicities at this lower income bracket. We also saw that while word-of-mouth recruiting for camper families is very efficient, what happens is you end up reinforcing existing groups of participants. In other words, we must change the way people hear about Kesem to diversify our camper families and our student leaders. We also looked at no-shows, which are the population of camper families who sign up for camp but for whatever reason don't actually come to camp. And what we see is that 48% of our no-shows are persons of color, indicating there is more work to do here to retain these families after they apply for camp. On the next slide, we also looked at no-show rates based on income, and the highest percentages are in the lower income brackets, which means there is also work to do here in terms of retaining these families once they apply. We also looked at our volunteers and asked a number of questions in our surveys and interviews, including what might cause students to be hesitant about becoming a counselor. There is a wide range of answers here as well, including the fact that there is a fundraising requirement for students to participate and that Kesem conflicts with paid work opportunities. We also asked our volunteers as student leaders whether they have experienced or witnessed discrimination. And you can see that the answers here are something we certainly want to address. We do not want our volunteers to experience bias during the counselor selection process. I'll go slowly through these slides so you can read the quotes. As I mentioned, we did some interviews of camper families, and these quotes are really powerful. I'm going to highlight the few that I think are most interesting, although they are all important. What really jumped out to me here was the fact that email is by far the best way to communicate with one parent, while another says they once went a year without checking email. So it certainly makes you think about how we communicate with families in a way that's meaningful to them. Regarding camp programming, I think about the quote around asking a family to send their kids with clothing so that they don't mind throwing away because we're going to do a massive food fight. And if you do, they're certainly not the messages that we want our campers or camper families to hear. Around camp preparation and transportation, there is a quote about how transportation issues mean that poor people can't come to camp. We certainly want our families to have access to camp. And then around communication, we have a family saying that they want to be contacted by phone and that they aren't sitting in front of a computer. We must be thinking about how best to communicate with the families that's most helpful and beneficial to them. We took all of that data, which took weeks and months to collect and analyze, and we came up with some main findings that we'd like to go through in the next slides. One is that we know Kesem is underrepresented, particularly by low-income Latinx and Black groups. So what we are doing is expanding our chapters to offer greater access to these groups. And we are providing more resources for students to diversify their student leaders and camper families. We need a better way to communicate with families. So we invested in a bilingual staff member who is available by phone to answer camper family questions and assist with camp applications. We also simplified our camper application and made it mobile friendly. We have translated our camper application and associated documents into Spanish. And then there was the fact that not all families were familiar with the concept around a sleepaway camp, and we're updating our materials to better explain what camp looks and feels like. We found that we say camp is free, but there is an associated cost with attending for either transportation or supplies. So we are doing what we can to help chapters get funding or donations around busing, gas cards for families, or camp supplies. And we talked about the reliance on that word-of-mouth recruiting, and we are updating the resources for our students to give them tools and tips to better get out into the communities and recruit new campers. We learned that our programming may not feel inclusive, and the obvious change that we could do right away was eliminating the food component of messy games. And we've updated our camp song library to make those songs and lyrics more inclusive for all of our campers. We are also creating DEI training, like this module, for our student leaders and volunteers. We are also trying to strengthen the committee participation at the chapters to allow students to get involved with Kesem at different levels of commitment. We created a DEI panel of students and camper parents to provide input on future DEI initiatives, and we provided DEI training to our staff and National Board of Directors. We introduced Amazon Business for all of our staff and student leaders to use, which allows for direct billing and fewer out-of-pocket costs. So we've done a lot of work around DEI, and in the next few slides, there are additional details around this work. I'm going to highlight only a few items. Eligibility. We have updated our camper intake process and our website's frequently asked questions to be inclusive of different family structures. Many of you are aware that we moved away from camp names to Kesem names, and we are using that terminology going forward. Around policies, feedback indicated that our health form was a very big barrier for many families, so we have removed the need to complete that form. We now rely on any other physical form that a doctor provides, and this can be paperwork a family already has, thereby eliminating the need for another doctor's visit. I mentioned earlier this individual fundraising has been a big sticking point, and some of our student leaders needed additional resources on how to do fundraising. We know some of our student leaders have limited fundraising networks they can draw upon, and we are working with a select number of chapters to pilot an approach where we customize individual fundraising goals with a focus on everyone working together to achieve the overall chapter fundraising goal. We hope this opportunity will be able to be brought to all chapters next year. We are increasing our support for campers with behavior issues or special needs. We have completed much DEI training, including sessions for our program directors. These program directors are taking this content back to the chapters to have discussions there as well. Each of our staff created a personal goal to help Kesem advance DEI. We have been sharing these goals with each other and helping each other achieve these goals. We started this year training our student leaders in the fall about some of our work around DEI and shared the importance of this work. We looked at how far the campsites were from where our families live and worked with more chapters to provide buses to get our campers to the campsites, rather than ask families to drive several hours to drop off their campers. We created new materials for our student leaders to use to conduct community info sessions, which we believe have been useful in meeting new camper families. We have applications available at these sessions so families can apply right there, rather than having to go on later and then apply. We have encouraged our students to have more hard copy camper applications available, and we are also working to make the Spanish version available to families when needed. We updated the camper application to ask families about the best way to contact them. We are working with the chapters to communicate with these families according to their preferences. As I mentioned before, we updated our website to better describe what it's like to attend camp, to help our new chapter campers be less afraid of the camp experience and increase the likelihood that they will come to camp. And through the generosity of our chapters, we have been able to provide grants where chapters can request money to help pay for transportation for camp or camp supplies for our families. You can see we've done a lot of work in the past year based on the feedback that we got through the surveys and through the interviews that we completed. And here are some of our takeaways. What really resonated for so many of us is that while camp is free, there is a cost associated with attending camp. Families need transportation and camp supplies. We are very grateful for our staff and our student leaders and the open dialogue we have had about the importance of DEI. As I said earlier, we're not going to get it right on day one, and we're not going to get it done this year. But we're taking steps best we can, and I'm really proud of the work we've done so far. We were told by some external reviewers of our work that we have accomplished more in a year than some organizations have in 3 years. As I mentioned, we created a DEI panel, and this is available to both camper families and student leaders to participate in. We've had a lot of interest, and we're really thankful for that. We still need participants from our underrepresented communities, including persons of color, people with disabilities, or people who are trans and gender expansive. So if you are interested in joining the panel, please reach out to us by the email addresses shown. And finally, let's talk about next steps and how you can help us continue our DEI journey. We can't do this work without you. Please share out the information provided in this training module. Think about how your chapter can continue discussions around the importance of this work. Help us recognize that this work is hard and will not be done perfectly, and raise feedback when you have it. And help us reflect at times and also be grateful for all that we have accomplished together. Think about what tangible actions you can do with your chapter. Perhaps it is having a supply drive for camp supplies or creating new community contacts. Each action is so important and meaningful. Thank you for listening to this training module and for all that you do for Kesem. Thank you.